I recently had a chance to visit Quebec City. I've been there many times, but this time I started to wonder, how did this all start? Of course, I know the story of Christopher Columbus, but looking at the old century buildings, you start to go, what about this building? Whose idea was this to have this here? Who funded it? Who started this? Quebec City is known for having one of the first hospitals in North America, the Hôtel Dieu du Québec. It's not a hotel, of course, but it is a hospital, and it is called Hôtel Dieu du Québec, founded in 1639 by the Augustine sisters. As you can imagine, I started thinking, really, who funded it? How did it get there? And also, what kind of medicine were they using? I mean, this is, after all, a gardening channel. So I'll give you a little bit of history, just a little bit of background. It's kind of funny. The story of the Hôtel Dieu du Québec cannot be told without speaking about Marie-Madeleine de Vigneron. You see, Marie-Madeleine back in 1620 was a young woman that was forced into a marriage with a marquis. Following the marriage with the Marquis, she became known as the Duchesse d'Aiguillon. And after 2 years of marriage, the Marquis died. Marie-Madeleine decided never to remarry, but instead to focus on doing charitable work and, of course, influencing and supporting some religious missions that she wanted to do. Marie-Madeleine was also the niece of a very powerful cardinal, Cardinal de Richelieu. If you've ever watched The Three Musketeers, that is the Cardinal that you see in the red coats and that always kind of mean in the storyline. So he was her uncle. And from that, the Cardinal had the ear of the king of the time. When Marie-Madeleine decided that she wanted to have a religious mission in New France and establish a hospital, the Cardinal was able to get the king to provide the funding for that mission. So, of course, that's where the money came from. And that's how the hospital was established back in 1639. The Sisters of Augustine, of course, were the one that crossed the ocean and made this happen. They established it through a lot of hard work. And you can only imagine the hard winters that they had to go through. I mean, even just crossing the Atlantic would have been just torturous. It took them 3 months to get across. Once they got there, they had to build everything and start everything from scratch. So the sisters got there, and after 5 years, they were able to establish what we know today, the permanent structure of the Hôtel Dieu, the hospital that was established there. As you can think, they encountered, of course, the First Nations that were there. That story is a whole different story that we won't get into. But to look at this from the medicine perspective, what did they bring with them? How did they set this up? The sisters started a garden. And through that garden, they were able to keep some of the plants that they needed to be able to take care of some of the patients and some of the people that were around them. That garden is still around. If you have a chance to ever go to visit Quebec City, make your way to the Augustine Sister, to the Hôtel Dieu. And in the back, you will find a small little plot of garden that is still there. So again, like I'm saying, they brought their books, they brought their knowledge, they brought some of the plants that they needed to get things going throughout that winter, but they did have to grow some of the plants themselves. Some of the major plants that they had was things like raspberry, lavender. They had some yarrow, but we'll go through each one of those and kind of tell you what is the knowledge and the use of each one of those plants and what they would have used it for back then. And some of these plants will surprise you. They are still in use nowadays and used for the same reason and the same applicable medicinal applications for some of them. Let's start with the raspberry plant. The sister used the raspberry leaves particularly to make a tea that would soothe women's pain during childbirth. This is something that was readily available for them. There was wild raspberries available, but they also could grow it and use it in that way. If you didn't know that, that is something that is still being used nowadays. Next plant is lavender, which is something that we all recognize. Lavender was used for the same properties as it is used today. Its scent helped appease people that were anxious and make people very much more calm. That was one of its potent medicine use. It's also an antiseptic to use to treat some wounds. That is still the same nowadays. So if you collect lavender, you know how beautiful it is to put in the pillows and to sleep on it. So that use was exactly the same. The tobacco plant, not the common tobacco plant. This one is Nicotiana rustica, so tabac des paysans. So it's slightly a little different than your regular common tobacco plant, but when it's dried, it can be used on aching joints and wounds. So the sister would use it for that purpose. So a little bit different than the regular tobacco plant that we know now, but it is very much used for that purpose of helping joints and numbing up the pain. The next plant, you will definitely recognize it. It's the yarrow plant. I'm sure you still have some in your garden now. The yarrow plant, when it's actually crushed, it can be used to stop bleeding. So even right now, this is still being used. This is not something that's been lost over the years. So if you crush the yarrow, if you have a wound, you can put it on there. It's also antiseptic. So it prevents infections and all that. So it is still an amazing plant that is still being used nowadays. And the sisters knew how to use that back in 1600s. There you go. The next plant you will also recognize, it's hop. Of course, we know it's for its beverage property as beer, but just like nowadays, when you have a beer, you kind of fall asleep a little bit, kind of slow down. Back then, the sisters would use it to help people kind of peacefully fall asleep and stay asleep for a little bit longer, especially when they were wounded. So it still got the same properties as it did back then. This next one I wasn't really familiar with. It's called a sweet gale. It was mainly used as an insect repellent. They would dry it and then hang it inside the houses to repel insects from coming in. I'm sure mosquito bites and all this kind of stuff. So it was useful for the sisters to help people keep some of those bugs away from the houses and also from people getting bitten by certain kind of insects. This other one, also called wild serapillier, is another one I wasn't very familiar with, but supposedly when the tonic was used, so they would boil it and then use a tonic, it would help against respiratory illnesses. So again, and help some kind of inflammation inside the body. Helps we get against aching joint, respiratory illnesses, and it's still being used now. I had never heard about it before that, before I started looking into what the sisters would have used. So yeah, so wild serapillier, and I have the name of it listed right at the beginning. So very interesting. This next one, thé de bois or winter greens, it's a very low-lying shrub that you'll find in your garden, probably kind of evergreen, depending what zone you live in. It has the same properties as aspirin. Can you believe it that back then the sisters had found something that had methyl salicylate in it, just like what we find in aspirin nowadays? It would be dried, and then again, they would use it as tea. It has the same kind of smell, minty aroma as mint, but it's not mint, but it has an anti-inflammatory properties, just like aspirin does. So pretty amazing. Okay, this next one you will recognize that it's a maidenhair fern. So we all know about fern plant, but this one is the very delicate fern, and it was used by the Augustine sisters because it offered relief for respiratory ailment like bronchitis and cough. They would again hang it up, dry it, and put it in teas. That was their main way, of course, of preserving a lot of these plants, but that's how they would use it. It's not commonly used now, but it's very interesting to see that something like a fern has these kind of properties that we're probably not as familiar with anymore. This is another one that you will be familiar with. This is wild ginger. It's not like the regular ginger. This one is native to Canada, Arasat du Canada, and it is basically found underneath the canopy in the forest. So similar like other ginger, it is used to soothe stomach ailment. The root is ground, dried, and ground into kind of a powdery mix and used into a tea again. It stimulates digestive and stomach discomfort. It kind of helps in both of those scenarios. But yes, they were able to use that. This next one I was not familiar with at all. It's called bloodroot. And there is a Canadian version of that. It is a beautiful little plant. And the sap of it is actually red. It's vibrant red when you squish it, which is very interesting, hence the name bloodroot. It's no longer used. It's actually thought to be toxic nowadays, but they would use it back in the day to treat warts of anything, that's kind of interesting. That's what the sisters would use it for. It's like a topical antiseptic. The sap in it is kind of sticky. They would dry it up also. They would turn it into a powder, and make it into a salve and then use it to treat warts. So very interesting. This next plant you will definitely recognize. It's chicorée. Nowadays, it is very popular that people use chicorée as a substitute for coffee. Well, guess what? They did the same thing back in the 1600s. The sister used it also as a substitute for coffee. I mean, coffee was pretty hard to get. So they would use it for that purpose. They would dry it, hang it and dry it, and then use it as a substitute for coffee. It's still being used today. Lots of people know that. It also promotes it helps your digestive health and promotes liver health too, which I didn't know. But it's still a good drink to have. And I know a lot of people that don't like to drink coffee will sometimes have that as a substitute. This next plant is called the marshmallow plant. If you've looked at any natural hair products, marshmallow is sometimes included, and that would be a derivative of this plant. It's got a beautiful light little purple flower, but it also has these great properties, very slippery, and it's again found within the roots of the plant. So they would dry it and use it, but they weren't using it for cosmetic purposes. It was used basically to comfort and heal wounds and open wounds. So very interesting. And it's still something you can find. They also used it in syrup. So a soothing cough syrup was made of marshmallow roots. Interesting again, to help your sore throat, to help with coughing, and that was being used for that purpose. But like I said, nowadays it's very popular to find it in natural hair products. Now, the next plant, you probably have that in your garden. It's a beautiful columbine. It's the wild version of the columbine. It comes out in late spring. It's beautiful little flowers. This one is considered toxic nowadays, but it does help reduce what they used to use it for. It was to reduce inflammation, reduce fever, skin conditions. So it had lots of properties that they used it for. I mean, we don't do that anymore, but it's very interesting that they had figured out how to use this beautiful little wild columbine plant to reduce some aches and pains that they had back then, especially inflammation and skin conditions. Now, this one is something I was not familiar with at all, and it's the common grumel plant. I think I'm saying that right. It's got beautiful little white flowers, and they would use it for kidney stones. I don't know even how they figured this one out, but it had significant potencies for kidney cones and kidney stones and urinary issues. So the sisters had figured out, I mean, it's no longer used. It says now that it's probably toxic for your liver. But back then, I mean, to have figured out how to help people pass kidney stones, I mean, that's kudos. This next plant we've all heard about, and it's opium poppies. So just like nowadays, same source of plant, the sister used it for the same thing as a sedative. So they had figured out that carefully used and prepared carefully, again, in kind of a tea, would bring people down and would really help them fall asleep and really help their ailments. It is, as you know, opium poppy is the source now of morphine, codeine, and still being used. The next plant is called comfrey. And you may have some comfrey in your garden that you probably just use to kind of boost your compost. But you can still use it as a salve. It is really good to mend and restore broken bones, actually. Or if you have any kind of arthritis kind of feeling in your bones, if you're able to dry the leaves and then mix it into a salve, so with some oils or butters, and then rub it on your skin to help that area where you're aching in your bones. It is very good for that. That is something actually that you can find a YouTube on. There's lots of comfrey salve recipes still being used by people, and you can find that just by Googling a little bit. You'll see it. It's amazing that they used it for exactly that same purpose back in the day. This next flower you are definitely familiar with. It's Lobelia cardinalis. This is a plant I'm sure you have in your garden. It's a beautiful red plant, but it's not just beautiful. It was used as a plant to help people with respiratory issues. I don't know how the sisters figured that one out, but they used it for people that had maybe asthma, really bad coughing, that were in dangerous situation where they couldn't find anything else to help them out. Nowadays, we don't use that anymore, and it's considered, a little toxic. But that is amazing that they had something that would help people that had these coughing issues back in the day. This next one is very easy. It's rhubarb. I mean, we all do rhubarb pie and all sorts of cooking, but it also has very medicinal properties. It helps with your digestive system, and it's still being used nowadays to help with that. It cleanses also your system. So if you've had some issues in the past, you could use that, juice it up, and have some rhubarb juice. It really helps to strengthen your system. It's very easy to grow in the garden. It's not even that hard. So something to definitely add to your diet if you feel that you need it. And the sisters back in the day had also figured that out. This next plant you're definitely familiar with, flax. Flax seeds, you might even put it in your juice in the morning, things like that, but it is full of omega-3. The sisters used it back then basically to help soothe again, like creating an ointment for irritated skins or burns or any kind of wounds again. We're all probably maybe more familiar with flaxseed and some beauty products. So the properties that are found in it are, again, the same as what we use it for today. This next one you're definitely going to be used to. It's oats. So same as everybody else, they would have it in there, they would eat it and all that, just like we do now. And just like we do now, we also add oats in some of our beauty products, as a scrub to help your skin. But they did the same thing with it too. It would help calm irritations and inflammation. They would add it to baths to help people with skin issues. So again, this whole holistic approach of using oats just like we do now. Now, when I started looking at all this, I was really just curious about how did they provide care? How did they make medicine back then. I mean, not everything could be imported and for, taken on a boat for months and months. So you can see through these varieties of these different plants that we've talked about, whether it was the marshmallow plants, the simple columbine plants, beautiful little flowers, the yarrow that you probably have now growing in your garden, and, simple things like having a rhubarb plant. They figured out all of the plants that were needed to provide medicinal application to the people that lived in the colonies at the time and that required their help. It is an amazing story. I know it's kind of a different kind of little video here, but I was really fascinated, like I said, walking through Quebec City and seeing this hospital that was created in 1639 and thinking, what were they using and how did they really assist the people in the colonies? I hope you liked and enjoyed this video. If you did, please press the like button, the usual, and I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, happy gardening.